I always thought my life was simple. My marriage, my home, my friendships. They were all things I believed I could trust without question. I had Jason, my husband of 10 years, a man I loved for his charm and the quiet stability he offered. And then there was Kara, my best friend since college, the one person I thought would never betray me. We were inseparable, or so I believed. At first, it was nothing. A text that popped up when Jason thought I wasn't looking. A perfume I didn't recognize lingering faintly on his jacket. Late nights at work, meetings he couldn't quite explain. I told myself I was overthinking. Who really notices these things, right? But every time I dismissed it, the little voice in the back of my mind whispered louder. Something isn't right. I remember the night it really started gnawing at me. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when Jason walked in, hugging me from behind, murmuring something about a long day. But I caught the faintest trace of perfume. Sweet, floral, and not mine. I froze, pretending to smooth out the wrinkles in a shirt, pretending I hadn't noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked, a little too casual. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." It was in that moment that I realized suspicion could feel like a weight pressing down on your chest. You can't breathe freely. You can't think clearly. In every laugh, every glance, every little movement becomes a puzzle you're desperate to solve. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more. The little things that never used to matter suddenly shouted at me. A lingering text notification quickly hidden. A sudden change in his routine. Kara's frequent visits too perfectly timed. I watched them both carefully, piecing together patterns, looking for proof I didn't yet have. And with every passing day, the pit in my stomach grew, an invisible warning I tried to ignore. I thought it was maybe paranoia. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't know how bad it could get. That's the thing about betrayal. You don't see it coming until you're standing right in front of it, and by then, it's already rewritten your entire life. And I didn't realize that the storm was already at my doorstep. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. Jason's phone was never far from him, always face down on the kitchen counter, buzzing at odd hours. And every time it did, he would chuckle to himself, sometimes whispering a name I didn't recognize. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it's just a coworker, I told myself, but the unease in my chest wouldn't fade. Then there was Kara. She showed up at my house at the most convenient times, always with that easy smile and a casual, "Hey, just thought I'd drop by." Sometimes she'd linger longer than necessary, leaning a little too close to Jason, laughing a little too easily at his jokes. I hated the jealousy I felt. It made me feel petty, but I couldn't help it. Something felt wrong. I started noticing Jason's subtle behaviors too. The way he would check his phone while I was in the next room, the way he'd suddenly remember a meeting at the last minute, the way he always seems to have an excuse for everything. One evening, I was making dinner, chopping vegetables on the counter, when Kara called. "Hey, Em," she said, that bright, cheerful tone that used to make me smile. "I was just wondering if Jason's around. Thought we could hang out for a bit." I felt a twinge of something sharp in my chest. "Sure," I said slowly, trying to sound normal. "He's in the living room." A silence fell over the line. Then she laughed, lightly teasing, "Perfect. I'll be over in 10." I hung up, my hands trembling slightly as I set the phone down. Kara didn't just happen to be in my house. She was there for him. And suddenly, every little thing started to make sense. The perfume, the late nights, the secretive smiles. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I wanted to be sure. I watched, quietly, like a hawk circling its prey. I checked their schedules, listened to their conversations from another room, observed the little interactions they thought went unnoticed. And with every passing day, the picture became clearer. They were closer than anyone had the right to be. I remember one night in particular. I was sitting on the sofa, pretending to read a book, when Jason paced the room, phone in hand. I could hear him laughing, the sound so intimate and easy that it made my stomach twist. Kara's voice, soft and teasing, came through the phone speaker, and suddenly, I knew. I just knew. But I still didn't act. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I didn't let them know that I saw. I told myself patience was power, and I wanted all the power. I didn't realize it then, but the moment that would change everything was coming, and I would stumble into it completely unprepared. The day I found out, everything seemed normal. I had a meeting scheduled at work, but it got canceled last minute. At first, I felt a strange sense of relief, an unexpected, quiet afternoon. I decided to head home early, thinking I could relax for a while, maybe catch up on some reading. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off immediately. The front door was unlocked. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe Jason had left it open while taking out the trash. Maybe Kara had come over earlier than expected. I stepped inside cautiously. The house was quiet at first. Then, laughter. Not ordinary laughter. Easy, warm, intimate laughter. The kind that belongs between people who shouldn't be there. I froze in the hallway, my stomach twisting into knots. I crept closer, every step heavier than the last, until I peeked around the corner. There they were. Jason, sitting on the couch, leaning toward Kara in a way that made my chest ache. And Kara, leaning into him, laughing, whispering, touching him just enough to show familiarity, but not enough to stop anyone from noticing. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just watched. The room seemed to shrink around me. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. Betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, smiling, pretending it's harmless until it's too late. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to throw something, yell, break everything in sight. But a strange calm washed over me instead. Rage wasn't the answer. Control was. That's what I needed. Control. I stepped back quietly, pretending I hadn't seen anything. My mind was racing, calculating every possible move. I knew this wasn't the time for chaos. This was the time for strategy. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would let them think they were safe. I would gather proof. I would understand the full extent of their betrayal. And then I would reclaim everything they had tried to steal from me. I poured myself a glass of wine in the kitchen, setting it down with a casual clink, just like I always did when unwinding after work. Calm, collected. I picked up my phone and dialed Kara. "Hey," I said softly, my voice the picture of friendliness. "I think we need to talk. Alone." Her laugh over the line was light, oblivious, completely unaware that her perfect little world was about to crumble. And I smiled because for the first time in days, I felt the tiniest spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Kara arrived that afternoon carrying her usual bright smile and a coffee cup in each hand, like she had no idea she was walking into a minefield. I greeted her at the door, smiling warmly, as if nothing was wrong.
"Sure," I replied, my tone casual, almost bored. "Come in, sit down." She plopped onto the couch, placing the coffee on the table. Jason wandered in at some point, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface. He smiled at me, probably expecting me to act normal, expecting support, expecting compliance. He got neither. I let Kara talk first. She rambled about work, vacations, and inside jokes I used to share with her before the laughter had turned dangerous. She thought I didn't know. She thought I trusted her. I nodded and smiled, taking careful sips of my wine. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every slip, every detail she revealed. Jason sat nearby, occasionally glancing at her with that familiar, indulgent smile. He had no idea that every look, every laugh, every casual touch I had seen weeks ago had been etched into my memory. The more they talked, the more careless they became. They started repeating stories I already knew weren't true, trying to reassure themselves and maybe me that nothing had happened. I bit back the urge to laugh. The arrogance of people who think they're untouchable is one of the most delicious things in the world. I asked a few questions, the kind that sounded innocent but were carefully calculated to see how they'd respond. Kara answered confidently. Jason chimed in without hesitation, both revealing more than they intended. And I collected it all, mentally recording every word, every slip, every detail she revealed. Jason sat nearby, occasionally glancing at her with that familiar, indulgent smile. He had no idea that every look, every laugh, every casual touch I had seen weeks ago had been etched into my memory. The more they talked, the more careless they became. They started repeating stories I already knew weren't true, trying to reassure themselves and maybe me that nothing had happened. I bit back the urge to laugh. The arrogance of people who think they're untouchable is one of the most delicious things in the world. I asked a few questions, the kind that sounded innocent, but were carefully calculated to see how they'd respond. Kara answered confidently. Jason chimed in without hesitation, both revealing more than they intended, and I collected it all, mentally recording every word, every slip, every detail she revealed. Jason sat nearby, occasionally glancing at her with that familiar, indulgent smile. He had no idea that every look, every laugh, every casual touch I had seen weeks ago had been etched into my memory. By the time our little girls' chat was over, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had all the ammunition I needed. And the best part? They had no idea. I watched them leave the house that evening, smiling politely, completely unaware that their casual arrogance was the very thing that would undo them. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. I felt steady, calculating, ready. I didn't realize it yet, but the next step, when I finally put my plan into motion, would change everything, and there would be no turning back. For the next few days, I planned. Every detail had to be perfect. I couldn't afford mistakes. Not now, not when I had them exactly where I wanted them. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about screaming or throwing things. It was about control. And control meant patience, precision, and staying calm while they stumbled blindly into their own trap. I decided on a girls' day with Kara. It was simple on the surface, a casual outing to a quiet cafe, nothing extravagant, just the two of us, talking like old friends. Except this time, I would be the one steering the conversation. Jason wouldn't be involved, or so they thought. Kara would brag. She would reveal details she never should have, and I would capture it all. I spent hours rehearsing in my mind what I would say, how I would respond, and how I would make her feel safe. Every smile, every laugh, every nod would be calculated to encourage her to let her guard down. I wasn't angry on the surface. I was polite. I was friendly. I was deadly. When the day arrived, Kara showed up, radiant as ever, carrying her usual confidence like a shield. "Ready for our little adventure?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "Absolutely," I said, smiling softly. "It's been a long time since we had a proper chat." On the drive, she talked about Jason casually, mentioning little things I already knew were lies. She laughed at stories she thought I wouldn't remember, bragged about her influence over him, and underestimated completely how much I already knew. I listened quietly, sipping my coffee, pretending to be absorbed in her words, and I recorded everything. Every laugh, every smirk, every confession, each piece of evidence a tiny nail in the coffin of their little world. I could feel the tension rising, but only in my mind. On the surface, I was calm, almost warm, and that was the key. People reveal everything when they think they're safe. People brag when they think no one sees the truth. By the time we left the cafe, I had it all. Every lie, every justification, every smug laugh captured and cataloged, and I knew exactly how to use it. Back at home, I placed the recordings where they couldn't be traced to me immediately. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need public humiliation. I just needed control. I wanted them to feel exposed, to squirm in the consequences of their own arrogance, and to realize that the trust they had taken for granted was gone forever. I poured another glass of wine, watching the sunset from the kitchen window. The trap was set, and they had no idea it was coming. The next step was the most satisfying part: execution. I had everything I needed: the recordings, the evidence, the knowledge that Jason and Kara had underestimated me completely. Now it was time to let the world see what they had done. I didn't post anything online. Social media would have been messy, obvious, and far too easy to trace. No, I wanted subtlety. I wanted precision. I sent copies of the recordings anonymously to their families, their workplaces, and a few mutual friends I knew who would understand the gravity of what they had done. Each recipient received it with just enough context to make the betrayal clear, but not enough to point fingers at me. And then I waited. The outfall was immediate. Whispers began at work. Questions started from people who had always thought of them as perfect. Kara's professional reputation took a small but noticeable hit. Her confidence faltered when colleagues stopped laughing at her jokes, and she realized people were watching her differently. Jason, too, felt it. He began noticing glances in hallways, hushed conversations, the subtle judgment and smiles that once had been friendly. At home, I didn't react. I continued my normal routines: pouring coffee in the morning, tidying up, going about my life as if nothing had changed. The calm, the collected exterior, it drove them insane. I could see it in Kara's texts: vague apologies, desperate attempts to reach me. Jason tried to act normal, but the tension was obvious. I had taken the trust they thought they had and shattered it completely. And I hadn't even raised my voice. The real revenge wasn't in their humiliation. That was just a byproduct. The real power was watching them realize that I no longer needed them, watching them squirm while I stayed composed, watching them understand without me saying a word that their world had shifted and I was the one holding the compass. One night, I received a message from Jason, short, almost pleading. "Can we talk, please?" I stared at it for a long time, my heart steady. I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit there, knowing he was already feeling the weight of what he had done. And somewhere deep down, I smiled. Not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt the balance tipping back in my favor. The next few days were delicious in a way I hadn't expected. I watched them stumble. awkwardly, trying to maintain appearances, while the reality of their betrayal slowly unfolded around them. Kara's messages came in, some apologetic, some pleading, some angry. Jason's attempts to act normal were clumsy, strained, and full of tension. At work, Kara noticed the subtle shift immediately. Colleagues who had always laughed at her jokes now paused, exchanged glances, asked pointed questions behind closed doors. She tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the walls were closing in. I knew because a mutual friend discreetly relayed everything to me, proof that my trap was working perfectly. Jason's world started cracking too. He noticed whispers in meetings, quick glances that lingered too long, and the sudden change in how people interacted with him. He tried to defend himself, tried to smooth over the cracks, but there was nothing left to save. Trust had been broken, quietly, methodically, and there was no way to put it back together. At home, the atmosphere shifted as well. They were careful around me now, hesitant, watching their words, their actions, their gestures, every casual touch, every joke, and yet, despite the satisfaction of watching the fallout, a part of me remained cautious. I couldn't let my guard down. They had underestimated me once. Never again. One evening, Jason came into the living room, hesitating at the doorway. His eyes flicked to me nervously, and I could almost hear the questions he wanted to ask. He didn't know where to start, and I didn't offer guidance. Kara's text kept pinging my phone, short and desperate. "Emily, please, I never meant..." And then another, "I was wrong. Can we talk?" I smiled softly, pouring myself a glass of wine. I didn't need them to grovel. I didn't need them to suffer. The real power, the true revenge, was the knowledge that I no longer needed them at all. But I couldn't deny it. Watching them squirm, watching them realize they had lost the life they had taken for granted, was intoxicating. It was inevitable that they would try to confront me directly. I knew Jason would come first, hesitant, careful, trying to measure my reaction before speaking. Kara would follow with her desperate texts and awkward apologies, and when that moment came, I was ready. Jason approached me one evening while I was reading in the living room. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes flicking nervously, and I could almost hear the questions he wanted to ask. He didn't know where to start, and I didn't offer guidance. Kara's text kept pinging my phone, short and desperate. "Emily, please, I never meant..." And then another, "I was wrong. Can we talk?" I smiled softly, pouring myself a glass of wine. I didn't need them to grovel. I didn't need them to suffer. The real power, the true revenge, was the knowledge that I no longer needed them at all. But I couldn't deny it. Watching them squirm, watching them realize they had lost the life they had taken for granted, was intoxicating. It was inevitable that they would try to confront me directly. I knew Jason would come first, hesitant, careful, trying to measure my reaction before speaking. Kara would follow with her desperate texts and awkward apologies, and when that moment came, I was ready. Jason approached me one evening while I was reading in the living room. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes flicking nervously. "Emily, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. I looked up at him, calm, steady, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel the weight of it. "Sure," I said softly, closing my book. "What do you want to say?" He swallowed, hesitated, then said, I messed up. I made a huge mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched him, studying the way he tried to hold on to composure, and I realized how little he understood. He thought apologies would fix this. He thought pleading would change anything. "Karen, I said quietly, letting the words linger like a cold breeze. I know everything. His face went pale. The mask he had worn so comfortably for weeks started to crack. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to form words, and I let him struggle, because the power of silence is more devastating than any yelling. You think saying sorry will undo this? You think groveling will bring back my trust? You've had weeks to see how far you can push me, how much I might forgive you. And now you know, I don't need you anymore. Later, Kara texted again, frantic. Emily, please, I was wrong. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The moment had passed. They were left to face the consequences of their own actions, while I remained calm, composed, and in control. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. They had underestimated me, and that mistake would define the rest of their lives. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their presence. I didn't even need their apologies. The revenge wasn't in making them suffer. It was in reclaiming myself. And as I poured myself another glass of wine that evening, watching the sun dip behind the skyline, I realized something profound. The betrayal had taken so much from me, but it had also given me something I never had before: independence, power, freedom. After the confrontations and the fallout, I realized the most important thing wasn't revenge anymore. It was me. I had spent so much energy watching Jason and Kara, cataloging their lies, planning my moves, that I almost forgot to focus on myself. But now, I finally could. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. Projects I had once found tedious became exciting again. I reconnected with old friends, those who had drifted away when life and marriage took over. I started running again, just to feel my own strength, the beat of my own heart, the control I had over my own body. Every morning I woke up knowing that I was doing things for me and no one else. The messages from Jason and Kara didn't stop entirely. Short texts, hesitant apologies, desperate attempts to reclaim the past. But I ignored them. I didn't need validation. I didn't need recognition. And I certainly didn't need them. I had taken back my life, piece by piece. And that was enough. It was strange, though, to feel the freedom in silence. No more lies, no more secret glances, no more hidden betrayals. I could sit in my living room with a glass of wine and just be. And every time I thought about the past, I felt the tiniest flicker of satisfaction. Not revenge, exactly, but the knowledge that I had emerged stronger. Sometimes I would catch Jason or Kara in public, the shock still faintly on their faces when they saw me. They had hoped I would crumble, that I would beg, that I would fall apart. But I didn't. I smiled politely, sometimes waved, and walked on. No words were needed. The message was clear. I didn't need them. I never needed them. And slowly the pieces of my life that had felt stolen, peace, control, dignity, returned to me. I was whole again, but in a way that they could never touch. It took a while, but eventually the storm settled. Jason and Kara faded from my daily life, their attempts to reconnect or apologize quietly ignored. The text went unanswered, the calls went unanswered, and with each passing day I felt lighter, freer, stronger. I spent one evening alone on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. I thought about everything that had happened: the lies, the betrayal, the carefully plotted revenge. And I realized something. The real power had never been in their downfall. It had been in me all along. I had regained control not by shaming them or forcing them to grovel, but by reclaiming my own life. I had shown myself that I could endure heartbreak, deception, and betrayal and still rise. I had learned to trust my instincts, to observe carefully, to act decisively, and most importantly, to value myself above anyone who would betray that trust. Sometimes, late at night, I would smile at a memory of Kara's smug face, Jason's panicked eyes, or the subtle shift in their worlds when they realized I had outmaneuvered them. Not from cruelty, but because the experience had given me clarity. I poured myself another glass of wine, raising it slightly in a quiet toast to myself. To independence, to resilience, to the knowledge that betrayal, no matter how cruel, cannot take away your strength unless you allow it. The sun rose the next morning, warm and golden, spilling light into my home. I felt ready, ready for a new chapter, ready for a life unburdened by deceit, ready for anything. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not in secret, not in quiet calculation, but because I was finally free.